The Sunday sun beat down hard on the small town square of Oak Creek that March afternoon in 1947. The smell of dry earth, mixed with the sweet scent of blooming magnolias, filled the stagnant air. Families were spilling out of the afternoon service in small groups. The women in their fine fabric dresses, the men in suits despite the stifling heat. Isabel Miller walked 3 paces behind her husband, as she always did. Her eyes were fixed on the brick sidewalk. She counted every step to avoid thinking about the gazes she felt glued to her back. Her fingers gripped the handle of her worn leather purse with too much force. 10 years. 10 years of marriage and no children. 10 years of bitter herbal teas, folk remedies, promises to saints, and nights on her knees by the bedside, praying until her voice failed. 10 years of heavy silences at the breakfast table, of cold rooms, of embraces that never came. She knew every whisper, every poorly disguised comment. "Poor Isabel," they said with fake pity. "A beautiful woman, but what good is it if the land is barren?" The gossipers commented at the general store. She pretended not to hear. She kept her head held high, continued embroidering her dresses and sewing for the wealthy families. She did her work with hands that trembled more and more each day. James Miller walked ahead, greeting the men with curt nods. He was respected, a landowner, a livestock trader, a loud voice in town council meetings. But at home, it was different. At home, his silence was a brick wall that Isabel couldn't climb. There was no shouting, there was no violence from his hands, just that look of constant disappointment. That way of looking away when she entered the room. That way of eating without lifting his eyes from his plate. As if she were a broken piece of furniture he didn't know how to fix and didn't have the courage to throw away. The square was crowded. It was Sunday, the day to see and be seen. Single young women strolled in groups, giggling softly, casting glances at the young men who pretended not to notice. The men talked about the harvest, about politics, about the war that had ended 2 years ago but still left its marks. Children ran between the trees, their laughter echoing in the warm afternoon air. Isabel watched every child with a tightness in her chest that had become a part of her, like an extra rib, twisted and sore. That was when Mrs. Agatha Miller, her mother-in-law, approached. Isabel felt her before she saw her, that presence that always brought a storm. The woman was 63, a widow for a decade, perpetually in a black dress, with the face of someone who had been sucking on a sour lemon since waking up. She came accompanied by 3 other ladies, all of the same breed, women who fed on gossip as if it were holy bread. "Isabel." Agatha's voice cut the air like a sharp knife. It wasn't a call, it was a summons. Isabel stopped, her heart already racing. James kept walking. He didn't even look back. He knew what was coming. He always knew, and he always let it happen. "Yes, Mrs. Miller," Isabel replied, keeping her voice steady. She had learned never to show weakness in front of that woman. It was like showing blood to a rabid dog. Her mother-in-law planted herself in front of her, the other ladies forming a semicircle. Isabel realized then that it wasn't just 4 women. More people were starting to approach, curious onlookers attracted by the scent of imminent scandal. The entire square seemed to have stopped to watch. "Did you see Teresa, the wife of Anthony from the store?" Agatha spoke loudly, too loudly. Her voice was calculated to reach the maximum number of ears possible. "Married 6 months ago. She's already expecting her first child. 6 months, Isabel. Did you hear that?" The silence around them grew dense. Isabel felt the heat rise up her neck, staining her cheeks. Her fingers went ice cold despite the scorching sun. "What a blessing for them," she managed to reply, her voice coming out thinner than she intended. "A blessing is having a real woman." Agatha took a step forward, her small hard eyes fixed on Isabel. "A woman who serves the purpose God made her for, not a barren land, dry and useless, that bears no fruit even with desperate prayers." The words fell like stones. Isabel felt the ground slipping from beneath her feet. Around them, the murmuring began, some women bringing their hands to their mouths in feigned shock, others whispering among themselves. The men averted their gazes with discomfort, but without intervening. James was 10 paces away, his back turned, talking to 2 farmers as if nothing were happening. 10 years, Isabel. 10 years of my son trapped in a marriage that yields no heir. 10 years of our family without continuation because of you. You are a disgrace, a dry, useless woman. My son deserved a real wife, not you. Every word was a slap. Isabel felt the tears burning behind her eyes, but she didn't let a single one fall. Not here, not in front of them. She opened her mouth to respond. What, she didn't know, but no sound came out. The humiliation was complete, total, public, exactly as Agatha wanted. That was when a deep voice cut the air like distant thunder. "You are mistaken, Mrs. Miller." Everyone turned. From the other side of the square came Colonel Theodore Albright. Tall, broad-shouldered, graying hair combed back, his mustache well-groomed. He wore a dark suit despite the heat, his leather boots striking firmly against the stone pavement. He didn't run, didn't rush his pace, but there was something about his presence that made people step aside, clearing a path. Colonel Theodore was a respected figure in Oak Creek. He had 5 children, 4 boys and a girl, whom he had raised alone since his wife died 3 years earlier in a childbirth gone wrong. His estate was one of the most prosperous, employing half the town, and he had a reputation as a just but inflexible man. He wasn't one to meddle in other people's business. He wasn't one to defend another man's wife. He wasn't one to cause a scene in the public square. But there he was, stopping right beside Isabel, so close she could smell the tobacco and cologne coming from him. "With all due respect, Colonel, this is none of your business." Agatha composed herself quickly, but there was a wrinkle of uncertainty between her eyebrows. When a lady humiliates a young woman in the public square, in front of God and everyone, it becomes the business of anyone with decency. The Colonel's voice was low, but carried weight. "You are offending a woman who cannot defend herself. That is not Christian behavior. I am telling the truth." Agatha raised her chin, but Isabel noticed her hands trembling slightly. "She is barren, 10 years and no children. It is a wife's obligation to provide heirs, and it is a mother's obligation to have compassion." The Colonel didn't raise his voice, but every word fell like a sentence. "You lost that obligation when you decided to shame this young woman in front of everyone. There is much in this world we do not understand, Mrs. Miller. Many things happen inside a marriage that are no one's fault, or that are the fault of the person we least expect." There was something in that last sentence, a weight, an insinuation. Isabel glanced quickly at James and saw that he had turned around, his face pale, his wide eyes fixed on the Colonel. "What are you insinuating, Theodore?" James's voice came out hoarse. The Colonel turned slowly to face him. For a moment, the air between the 2 men became electrified, charged with something Isabel couldn't name but could feel. It was as if a conversation were happening without words, a recognition of something old and dangerous. "I'm not insinuating anything," the Colonel replied. "I'm saying that judging is easy. Knowing the truth is what's difficult." And then, to everyone's total surprise, especially Isabel's, he turned to her and offered his arm. A gentleman's gesture, of respect, of protection. "May I walk you to your home, Mrs. Miller? It is too hot, and this square is too full of idle people." Isabel looked at that extended arm, as if it were a plank of wood in the middle of a stormy ocean. She knew what it meant. Accepting would be a declaration. That she accepted the protection of another man. That she was defying her mother-in-law. That she was choosing dignity over submission. Refusing would be sinking for good, silently agreeing with every cruel word they had said about her. Her eyes met James's for a second. He was motionless, his face a hard mask. But she saw, finally saw after 10 years, the fear in his eyes. Fear of what? Of what the Colonel might say? Of what he might reveal? Isabel placed her hand on Colonel Theodore's arm. Her fingers trembled, but her voice didn't waver when she said, "Thank you for your kindness, Colonel." They crossed the square in the heaviest silence Oak Creek had ever known. Every step Isabel took on the pavement echoed like a drum. People parted ways, staring open-mouthed, whispering furiously. No one spoke aloud anymore. The scandal was too big, too fast, too unbelievable. Agatha stayed behind, her face red with fury, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. James didn't move, planted in the same spot, hands clenched into fists by his sides. Isabel walked without feeling her own legs. The Colonel's arm was firm under her hand. Solid, real. She didn't understand. She didn't understand anything. Why had this man, practically a stranger, stood up for her? What did he mean by those words about knowing the truth? Why had James looked so terrified? They turned the corner, leaving the view of the square, and the Colonel slowed his pace. Isabel's house was 5 blocks away, a simple house with white siding and a porch. She lived there with James, but in that moment, the idea of going back to that house filled her with dread. "You didn't have to do that," Isabel managed to say, her voice thin. "Now the gossip will be worse. They'll say that." "Let them say whatever they want," the Colonel interrupted gently. "That is the nature of small people. But one thing I've learned, Mrs. Miller, it is better to be gossiped about for doing the right thing than to live in peace for letting an injustice happen." They walked a few more steps in silence. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in orange and pink. From some house came the smell of stew cooking, of fresh coffee. Normal sounds of a Sunday late afternoon, but nothing seemed normal to Isabel. "You said something," she spoke softly, almost afraid of the answer. "About the truth, about guilt. What did you mean?" The Colonel stopped walking. They were in front of Anthony's General Store, closed on Sundays, the sign swaying slightly in the breeze that was beginning to blow. He looked at her, and Isabel saw something in his eyes that made her shiver. Compassion, yes, but also weight. The weight of someone carrying a heavy secret. "Mrs. Miller, there are things in this world that are not what they seem. There are guilts that fall on the wrong shoulders. And there are truths that stay buried because it is easier that way." He took a deep breath. "I cannot say more right now. It is not my place. But I want you to know one thing. What happened today in the square, the way they humiliated you, has nothing to do with the woman you are. Nothing." "But I am barren." Isabel heard her own voice breaking. 10 years, Colonel. 10 years and no children. How is that not my fault?" "Because there are things you do not know," he said slowly. "Things about your husband." "Things I know because ... He stopped, as if he had come too close to a cliff and pulled back at the last second. "Because what?" Isabel felt something lighting up in her chest. Hope? Terror? She didn't know. "Please tell me. I need to know." The Colonel looked around, checking if anyone was nearby. There wasn't. The street was empty. Everyone still in the square, likely dissecting the afternoon scandal. Before marrying you, James had an involvement with a young woman from the next town over. Her name was Helen. She got pregnant. The world stopped. Isabel felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The colonel's words echoed in her head like church bells. He had a child? She whispered. He did, a boy. But he denied the child, denied the girl, said it wasn't his, forced her family to move away in shame. That was 2 months before he married you. The colonel made a heavy pause. Mrs. Miller, I know this because Helen was my late wife's cousin. I saw the boy. He is the spitting image of James. There is no denying it. Isabel had to lean against the wall of the store. Her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. 10 years. 10 years she carried the guilt, the shame, the weight of being called Barren. 10 years of bitter tears, of desperate prayers, of nights weeping into her pillow. And during all that time, James knew. He knew he had fathered a son. He knew the problem was never her. Why did he never tell me? The tears finally came, hot and angry, streaming down her face. Why did he let me think it was me? Why did he let me be humiliated, destroyed, while he knew the truth? Because it is easier to blame the wife than to admit one's own mistake. The colonel's voice was thick with contained anger. Because he's a coward. Because protecting his own name is more important to him than your dignity. Isabel rested her head against the cold wall, her whole body trembling. Rage. She had never felt rage like this in her life. It was like fire running through her veins, burning everything it touched. Years of submission, of accepting in silence, of lowering her head, of swallowing humiliation. All exploding at once. And the child? She asked. Where is he now? Helen raised the boy alone. She works on a farm 2 towns over. The boy is 11 now. His name is Anthony. 11 years. 1 year older than their marriage. The math matched perfectly with the story James always told. That he had spent a few months away before getting married, settling business, scouting land. Lies. All lies. Why are you telling me this? Isabel wiped the tears with the back of her hand. You could have stayed quiet. You could have let me go on without knowing. The colonel looked away, and for the first time, Isabel saw vulnerability in that man who seemed made of stone. Because I stayed silent once, and I regretted it for the rest of my life, he said quietly. When my wife was pregnant with our 5th child, she told me she was tired, that her body couldn't take it anymore. She asked me to call the doctor from the city, and I listened to the local midwife say it wasn't necessary, that she was strong, that she would handle it. I trusted the wrong person, and my Bernadette died bleeding in front of me while I couldn't do anything. The pain in his voice was so raw that Isabel felt it in her own chest. I learned that silence kills, Mrs. Miller, that kept truths rot and poison everything around them. I saw you today in the square, being destroyed by a lie, and I couldn't stay silent again. I couldn't. They stood in silence for a moment. The church bell struck 5, the sound echoing through the empty town. Soon James would return home. Soon she would have to face that man, knowing what she now knew. What do I do? Isabel asked, and it was the question of someone who was drowning. How do I go back to that house? How do I look at him? You don't need to go back, the colonel said. Not today, not until you are ready. My house has a guest room. You can stay there. My daughter Mary, who is 15, will be happy to have female company. And before you ask, yes, I know what people will say. But my reputation can take it. The question is, can you take living the lie any longer? Isabel looked at the empty street, then at the path that led to her house. 10 years of that life. 10 years of being erased, diminished, humiliated. 10 years carrying a guilt that was never hers. And then she looked at Colonel Theodore, that man who had stood up for her for no apparent reason, who had challenged the entire town, who was offering shelter when she had nowhere to go. "I accept," she said, and for the first time in 10 years, she felt she was making a real choice, a choice of her own. If you are enjoying this story, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next chapters. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? I want to know who is following Isabel's story. The walk to the Colonel's estate took 20 minutes. The property was on the outskirts of town, a large house with thick walls and wide porches, surrounded by fields and pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. When they arrived at the iron gate, it was already getting dark, the purple sky speckled with the first stars. A girl appeared on the porch, Mary, the Colonel's daughter. She had long black hair tied in braids, bright eyes, and that contained energy of someone halfway between child and woman. When she saw her father with Isabel, her eyes widened with curiosity. "Mary, this is Mrs. Isabel Miller," the Colonel said, walking up the porch steps. "She will be staying with us for a few days. Please prepare the guest room." "Yes, Papa." Mary looked from one to the other, clearly full of questions, but too polite to ask. "Welcome, Mrs. Miller. I'll go get everything ready." Isabel entered the house and was greeted by the smell of polished wood and coffee. The living room was spacious, with robust, dark wood furniture, a prayer corner, portraits on the walls. She saw the photo of the Colonel's late wife, a beautiful woman with gentle eyes and a shy smile, holding a baby in her lap. "That was my Bernadette," the Colonel said, following Isabel's gaze. "The photo was taken when Mary was born." She had this way of looking at every child as if they were the first and the last at the same time. "She was beautiful," Isabel said sincerely. She was, inside and out. He stood looking at the photo for a moment longer, then turned. "The boys are at my brother's farm. They won't be back until Tuesday. So it's just me and Mary here. You will have peace." Peace. When was the last time Isabel had true peace? Mary reappeared, waving for Isabel to follow her. The guest room was simple but clean, with a double bed covered by a patchwork quilt, a dresser, a crucifix on the wall. It had a window overlooking the orchard, and on the windowsill, someone had placed a small vase with violets. "I put the violets there this morning," Mary said shyly. "It makes the room more cheerful. If you need anything, just call. My room is next door." "Thank you, Mary. You are very kind." The girl smiled, then hesitated. "Mrs. Miller, what people said about you in the square today was very ugly. My father told me. I just wanted you to know that no one here will judge you. We know what it's like to be judged without reason." And she left, closing the door slowly. Isabel sat on the bed, and only then, in the privacy of that strange room, did she allow the tears to truly come. She wept for the humiliation in the square, for the discovery of James's betrayal, for the 10 lost years, for the life that could have been and wasn't. She wept until she had no more tears, until her body ached, until she was empty. When she finally stopped, night had fallen completely. Through the window, she could see the starry sky, so full of points of light it seemed impossible. And in the silence of that strange house, Isabel felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. She had gotten out. She had taken the first step. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know how she would face James again, or what she would do with the truth she now knew. But that night, in that borrowed room, for the first time in 10 years, Isabel Miller slept in peace. Downstairs, sitting alone on the porch with a glass of bourbon, Colonel Theodore looked at the stars and thought about all the truths yet unspoken, about all the consequences that would come, He had stirred up a hornet's nest. He knew. James wouldn't let this go. Agatha would spread poison throughout the town. The gossip would be cruel. But he had done the right thing. He was certain of that. And when that woman with tired eyes had accepted his arm in the square, when she had looked at him with that mixture of fear and hope, something in him had awakened. Something that had been dead since Bernadette was gone. Not love. It was too soon. Too absurd to think of that. But purpose. The feeling that there was still a reason to fight, to protect, to make a difference. He drank the rest of the bourbon in one gulp and went inside. Tomorrow would be another day. Tomorrow the consequences would come. But today, he had saved a woman from drowning in lies. And that, he thought as he closed the door, had to be worth something. Morning arrived with the crowing of roosters and the smell of fresh coffee rising through the floorboards. Isabel woke up disoriented, taking a few seconds to remember where she was. The strange room, the patchwork quilt, the violets in the window, it all came back at once, along with the memory of the previous day. The humiliation in the square, the colonel's words, the truth about James and the son he denied. She sat up in bed, her body aching as if she had been in a fight all night. She had slept heavily, a dreamless sleep of pure exhaustion. Through the window came the golden light of dawn, illuminating the fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was Monday. Normally, by this time, she would be in the kitchen preparing James's coffee, the table set with a starched white tablecloth, fresh bread, cheese, preserves. 10 years doing the same thing every morning. And today, she wasn't there. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Mrs. Miller? Are you awake? I brought coffee." Mary's voice was quiet, careful. "Come in, Mary." The girl entered carrying a wooden tray with steaming coffee, warm biscuits, butter, and a glass of milk. She placed everything on the small table beside the bed, with the care of someone who doesn't want to make too much noise. "Papa said to let you rest as long as you wanted, but I thought you might like to eat something." Mary adjusted the tray, her fingers fidgeting nervously with the hem of her apron. "I made the biscuits myself. I learned from my mother before before. Thank you, Mary. You are an angel." Isabel took a piece of the warm biscuit, and when she bit into it, the flavor melted in her mouth. "It's delicious. Your mother taught you very well." Mary's face lit up with the praise, but soon became serious again. "Mrs. Miller, last night, after you went up, there were people banging on the gate. It was Mr. James." The girl spoke in a low voice, as if telling a secret. "Papa didn't let him in, said you were resting and wouldn't receive visitors. They argued. It was ugly." Isabel's stomach turned. She put the biscuit back on the plate, her appetite vanishing. "What did your father say?" "He said Mr. James should be ashamed of himself. That a real man protects his wife, doesn't let her be humiliated in the public square. That if he had an ounce of decency, he would have shown his face sooner, when his own mother was destroying you." Mary bit her lip. "Then Mr. James said Papa had no right to meddle in other people's lives, and Papa replied that when he sees an injustice being done, it's the obligation of a good man to intervene." Isabel imagined the scene, the two men at the gate, raised voices in the night, the confrontation she had seen start in the square yesterday. She was causing this. She was bringing trouble to the house of someone who had been kind to her. "I need to leave," Isabel said suddenly, getting out of bed. "I can't stay here causing trouble. Your father has already done too much for me. It's not fair." You aren't going anywhere." Colonel Theodore's voice came from the doorway. He was leaning against the frame, already dressed for work. Riding pants, cotton shirt, hat in hand. "Forgive me for entering without asking, but I heard the conversation. and you stay as long as you need. But you are having problems because of me. James came here. You argued. James and I have old scores. The colonel entered the room, Mary stepping aside for her father. This didn't start yesterday. I should have settled things with him a long time ago. I was just waiting for the right time. He pulled the chair from the desk and sat down, his hat on his lap. His eyes, gray like a storm sky, met Isabel's firmly. Mrs. Miller, do you know what happens when we swallow the truth? It gets stuck in the throat, growing, turning into a lump that won't go down or up. It stays there, suffocating us little by little. I swallowed the truth when I didn't insist on calling the doctor for my Bernadette. I swallowed it when I didn't confront the midwife who said she knew everything. And my wife died because of my silence. The pain in his voice was so palpable that Isabel felt it in her own chest. You weren't to blame, she said softly. You couldn't have known. Yes, I could. I knew something was wrong. I saw it in her eyes, but I chose to believe those who told me what I wanted to hear, that everything was fine, that it was normal, that it would pass. And when I realized the mistake, it was too late. He took a deep breath. I won't do it again, Mrs. Miller. I won't stay silent, watching an injustice happen. I won't let you be destroyed by a lie when I know the truth. Mary stood near the door, eyes shining. It was clear she didn't know the whole story, but she understood the essence. Her father was protecting someone who needed protection. What do you want from me in return? Isabel asked. Because 10 years of marriage had taught her that nothing came for free. There was always a price. The colonel frowned, genuinely confused by the question. Nothing, Mrs. Miller. I want nothing. Do you think I help expecting payment? In my experience, everyone wants something. He sat in silence for a moment, then stood up, placing his hat back on his head. The only thing I want is for you to rest, eat, recover. And when you are ready, we will talk about what to do with the truth you now know. But that is on your time, no pressure. He walked to the door, then stopped. Oh, and Mary will stay with you today. I'm going to work in the fields, but if you need me, just send for me. After he left, Mary let out a long sigh. My father isn't one for much talk, but when he takes someone under his protection, there is no force in the world that can make him give up. You are safe here, Mrs. Miller. You can believe that. And Isabel, surprisingly, believed it. The days began to pass with a routine Isabel had never experienced. A routine without fear. She woke when her body asked, not when the clock demanded. She drank coffee without haste, talking to Mary about small things. The cat that had kittens in the barn. A new corn cake recipe. Stories from school. Simple things Isabel had forgotten existed. In the afternoon, she helped around the house. Not because she was forced, but because she needed to do something with her hands. She mended the boys' clothes, missing buttons, tears in the knees of pants. Mary stayed beside her, learning stitches her mother hadn't had time to teach her. My mother died when I was 12, Mary said, while threading a needle, her tongue sticking out in concentration. I remember her, but there are so many things I didn't learn. I didn't learn to do so many womanly things, you know? Papa does what he can, but there are things he doesn't know how to teach. What do you remember about her? Isabel asked, making an invisible stitch on the hem of a shirt. I remember she sang when she cooked. Old songs from when she was a child. I remember she sat on the porch at the end of the day and stared at the sky until it got completely dark. She said it was time to talk to God without using words. Mary smiled sadly. And I remember she was tired. In the last months before she died, she was very tired, but she pretended she wasn't for our sake. She loved you very much, Isabel said. You can tell by the way your father talks about her, by the way you and your brothers are. Her love is still here. Mary wiped her eyes quickly. Yeah, sometimes I feel her, especially when I'm cooking. It's like she's beside me, saying if it's good or not. The girl looked at Isabel with those eyes that were too sharp for her age. Mrs. Miller, can I ask you something? You can. Did you never want to leave before? To leave your husband's house? Isabel stopped sewing, the needle suspended in the air. Every day, Mary. Every single day. But where would I go? I have no living family, I have no money of my own. And the whole town thought the problem was me. They thought I was the defective one, the one who was no good. Leaving would be confirming that. But now you know it's not true. Now I know. But knowing the truth and being able to do something with it are two different things. Isabel went back to sewing, her stitches firm and precise. Your father told me about the son James had before marrying me, about the girl he abandoned. For 10 years I carried the guilt for not being able to get pregnant. 10 years destroying myself inside, thinking I was barren, that I was defective. And all the while, he knew. He knew the problem wasn't mine. That is very cruel, Mary said, her voice trembling with anger. It is, but it's the world we live in. A world where it's easier to blame the woman than for the man to admit his own failure. They sat in silence for a while, only the sound of needles piercing fabric filling the air. Through the window, the colonel could be seen on horseback, supervising the work in the fields. Even from afar, his figure was imposing, secure. My father likes you, Mary said suddenly, so quietly Isabel almost didn't hear. Mary, it's nothing like that. No, not that kind of like, not yet. The girl blushed, but continued. It's the way he looks at you. It's the same way he looked at my mother. Not when they were happy and everything was fine, but later, in the last months, when he knew he was losing her and couldn't do anything. It's a look of wanting to protect, of wanting to fix what's broken. Isabel felt her heart tighten in her chest. Your father is a good man, Mary, but he is helping me out of decency, not because of... Can I tell you a secret? Mary interrupted. After my mother died, my father became empty, like a house with no one inside. He took care of us, worked, did everything he had to do, but it was automatic. There was no life in his eyes, until yesterday. Yesterday? When he came back from the square and said you were staying here. For the first time in 3 years, I saw my father with that fire in his eyes again, that will to fight for something. You gave that back to him without even knowing. Are you managing to follow this story? If you're liking it, leave a like here so I know. And tell me, would you be able to live in that era with all those rules and judgments? Comment below. That night, Isabel was in the kitchen helping Mary prepare dinner when they heard the sound of horses at the gate. It was the colonel's sons returning from their uncle's farm, 4 boys between 7 and 16 years old, all with the same strong build as their father, the same gray eyes. They entered like a gale, bringing the smell of dust and sweat, loud voices telling stories of their days away. They stopped suddenly when they saw Isabel in the kitchen, eyes wide with curiosity and surprise. Boys, this is Mrs. Isabel Miller. She is our guest, the colonel said, entering behind them, his voice carrying an authority that allowed no questions. I expect you to treat her with all the respect the women of this house deserve. Yes, sir, they replied in chorus, but Isabel saw the questions in their eyes, the way they looked at each other. Dinner was interesting. The large wooden table was full. The colonel at the head, Mary on one side, the 4 boys scattered, and Isabel in the other corner, trying to take up as little space as possible. The food was simple but plentiful. Rice, beans, tot roast, collard greens, cornbread. Farm food, made to kill the hunger of those who work hard. The boys ate with the savage appetite of youth, but Isabel noticed how they looked at her when they thought she wasn't looking. Curiosity mixed with caution, like wild animals assessing a stranger in their territory. It was the eldest, Theodore Jr., whom everyone called Junior, who finally broke the awkward silence. "Mrs. Miller, you sew, right? I saw the pants you mended. They look better than new." "I do, yes, it's my profession. I've worked with sewing since I got married." "Do you think you could make a work shirt? Like the ones the hands use, but the right size?" Junior asked. "Mine are all too small. I grew too much this year." Before Isabel could answer, the second son, Peter, 13 years old, perked up. "And can you fix boots? Mine has a tear that won't stop growing." "Peter, Mrs. Miller is not a maid," the colonel said dryly. "I'm not bringing her here to work for you." "It's no problem," Isabel hastened to say. "I want to help. I need to do something. I can't stay idle." The colonel looked at her for a long moment, those piercing gray eyes, as if he were reading something in her that even she didn't know was written. "If you wish, I won't stop you. But it is not an obligation. I know, but I want to do it." And so naturally, Isabel began to fit into that house. In the following days, she mended clothes, adjusted seams, sewed buttons. She taught Mary more complex stitches. She cooked with the girl, recipes she had learned from her own mother decades ago. She talked to the boys about small things, school, the horses, the dreams they had for the future. And slowly, very slowly, she began to feel less like a guest and more like a part of it all. One afternoon, exactly a week after arriving, Isabel was on the porch mending a blanket when the colonel sat in the chair next to her. He had just returned from the fields, his face bronzed by the sun, his gray hair damp with sweat. "I need to tell you something," he said bluntly. He always spoke like that, direct, no flourishes. "James showed up in town today. He's spreading that you ran away from home, that you abandoned the marriage, that you're living here with me indecently." Isabel felt the blood freeze in her veins. "I knew this would happen," she said, her voice sounding tired. "I knew he wouldn't let it go. Agatha is helping. They say you are an adulteress, that you always were. That's why God didn't give you children. That I am a lonely widower who fell for your trap." He spat the words with disgust. Small people, speaking small vulgarities. "Maybe I should go back." Isabel put the blanket aside, hands trembling. "If I go back, the gossip stops. Your name stays clean. Your children don't need to hear these things. My children know the truth, and my name has been dirtied before. It will survive again." The colonel turned to her. "The question isn't what I can take. It's what you want to do. What I want doesn't matter." "It does matter!" His voice came out louder than intended, making Isabel flinch. He took a deep breath, composing himself. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to shout. But listen to what I'm going to tell you, Isabel. Spending your whole life doing what others want, living to please, shrinking yourself to fit in the spaces they leave for you, that is not life. That is death in small doses." He stood up, went to the edge of the porch, stared out at the fields stretching to the horizon. "When my Bernadette died, I promised myself I would never again let someone sacrifice themselves in silence. Never again would I pretend not to see when someone was suffering. And you have been suffering for 10 years, Isabel. 10 years being crushed, diminished, blamed for something that was never your fault. But I can't just leave the marriage. It doesn't work like that. I am married before God. God wouldn't want you trapped in a lie for the rest of your life." He turned back. "God wouldn't want you destroyed, erased, dead inside just to keep up appearances. Isabel felt the tears begin to fall. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to live differently. I spent 10 years being James's wife. Before that, I was my parents' daughter. I was never just me. I don't know who that person is. The colonel returned, knelt in front of her, a gesture so unexpected that Isabel widened her eyes. That proud, respected man on his knees on the porch floor. Then find out, he said softly. Stay here as long as you need. Find out who you are when no one is telling you who you should be. And when you find out, then you decide what to do. They stayed like that for a moment, him kneeling, her sitting, eyes locked on each other. There was something in the air between them, something new and frightening, and full of possibilities that neither was ready to name. That was when they heard the noise. Horses, many horses, loud voices coming from the gate. The colonel stood up quickly, his hand automatically going to his waist, where he usually carried his revolver. But he wasn't armed. Stay here, he ordered. Don't leave this porch. But Isabel was already standing up, heart beating erratically. She knew one of those voices. She knew it well. James had come, and he hadn't come alone. There were 7 men at the gate. James in front, mounted on a chestnut horse, face red with anger or drink, probably both. Beside him, 3 of James's brothers-in-law, big men with grim faces. And behind, 3 more acquaintances, people who owed James favors, people he had bought with money or influence. Colonel Theodore descended the porch steps with firm strides, boots striking the wood like a war drum. He wasn't armed, but his posture was that of someone who didn't need a weapon to command respect. Isabel stayed where he had ordered, but retreated into the shadow of the column, her whole body tense as a violin string. Theodore, James spat the name as if it were poison. I came to get what is mine. There is nothing of yours here, the colonel replied, voice low but laden with authority. There is only a guest under my protection. And she isn't going anywhere she doesn't want to go. Guest? James gave a hoarse laugh, without humor. Is that what you're calling it now? The whole town knows what's happening here. Lonely widower and married woman living under the same roof. Doesn't need a diagram. Watch your words, James, the colonel's voice dropped several degrees. Watch what you're insinuating about an honorable woman, and about my house. Honorable woman? James dismounted the horse in a brusque movement, stumbling slightly. He had definitely been drinking. A woman who abandons her husband, who runs away from home, who goes to live with another man. Is that an honorable woman to you? A woman who is publicly humiliated by a cowardly husband and a malicious mother-in-law. A woman who discovered truths you spent 10 years hiding. The colonel took a step forward. Want to talk about honor, James? Then let's talk. Let's talk about Helen. Let's talk about your son. The silence that fell was absolute. James went white as paper. The men behind him looked at each other confused. Isabel saw James's hand close into a fist, trembling. You have no right, he began. I have every right, the colonel interrupted. I have the right to defend an innocent woman who was blamed for your weakness. You let Isabel be called Barren for 10 years. You let her be destroyed, humiliated, massacred, when all the while you knew you had fathered a son. You knew the problem was never hers. That is none of your business. It became my business when you let that woman be attacked in the square and did nothing. It became my business when I saw her carry guilt that wasn't hers. The colonel pointed at James, an accusing finger. You are a coward. Always have been. You denied your own son so as not to dirty your name. You married Isabel, and let her think she was defective while you knew the truth. What kind of man does that? One of James's brothers-in-law dismounted, approaching. Colonel, with all due respect, this is a family matter. You shouldn't interfere. I should when I see an injustice being done. The colonel didn't take his eyes off James. And it's not just about Isabel. It's about all the truths you bury, James. All the lies you live. You don't know anything, James growled. But there was panic in his eyes now. Panic that more truths would be revealed. That was when the house door opened and Isabel walked down the steps. The colonel turned quickly, eyes wide. Isabel, I told you to stay. I know what you told me, she interrupted, and her voice came out firmer than she expected. 10 years of silence, and now the words came like a flood. But this is about me. And I won't stay hidden while men decide my destiny. She walked until she was beside the colonel, facing James for the first time in a week. The husband who had shared her bed but never his heart. The man who had let her die little by little for a whole decade. James, she said, and the name tasted strange in her mouth, like a word from a foreign language. I am not coming back. You are my wife, he said, voice shaking with barely contained rage. You are married to me before God and the church. You have to come back. I was your wife, Isabel corrected. I was that woman you let starve for affection, whom you let be humiliated, whom you blamed for what was never her fault. But that woman died on Sunday in the square, and I don't know yet who was born in her place, but I know she isn't going back to that house. Are you crazy? Are you possessed? James took a step forward, but the colonel moved, placing himself between them. Get out of the way, Theodore. This is between me and my woman. Not while you've been drinking and with this mob behind you, the colonel said. If you want to talk, come back sober and alone. I'm not leaving here without her. Yes, you are, the voice came from behind them. It was Junior, the colonel's eldest son, coming out of the house with a shotgun in his hand. Not aimed, but present. Behind him, the other 3 boys, all armed with what they had found. A machete, a hunting rifle, a thick piece of wood in the youngest one's case. My father said the lady isn't leaving, so she isn't leaving. The tension exploded like gunpowder. James's men put hands on weapons. The colonel's sons positioned themselves, forming a line. Mary appeared in the window, face pale, but holding a cast-iron skillet as a weapon. It was ridiculous and terrifying at the same time. 2 groups of men ready to kill each other over a woman who had been invisible her whole life. Stop, Isabel screamed, and the desperation in her voice was so genuine that everyone froze. Stop this right now. There will be no blood spilled on my account. I won't let it happen. She turned to James, and when she spoke, her voice was calmer, but loaded with a firmness she didn't know she possessed. You want me to come back? Then let's do this. You will answer 3 questions, 3 questions only. And if you answer with the truth, I consider coming back. But it has to be the truth, James. No lies. Not anymore. James hesitated, suspicious. What questions? First question. Helen and the boy. Is it true? Did you have a son with her before marrying me? The silence was deafening. James looked around, at his brothers-in-law, at the men he had brought, at the small crowd already starting to form on the road, attracted by the noise. His mouth opened and closed. Isabel saw the exact moment he decided to keep lying. I don't know where Theodore got this absurd story. I never had anything with any Helen. This is his invention to turn you against me. Lies, the colonel said. I have witnesses. I have letters. I have. Second question. Isabel interrupted him, eyes still fixed on James. During these 10 years, did you ever believe I wasn't Barren? That maybe the problem wasn't mine? James looked away. All the doctors said, I didn't ask what the doctors said. I asked what you believed. Deep down, you knew I wasn't the problem. You knew because you had fathered a child before, so you knew I was being blamed unjustly, didn't you? Isabel, answer. Her voice echoed through the farm. For the first time in 10 years, be a man and answer the truth. James's face contorted. Anger, shame, desperation, all together. And if I knew, he exploded. And if I knew, what would it change? Did you expect me to admit it in front of everyone? To stain my name, my family's name? You preferred to stain mine, Isabel said softly, but every word was a slap. You preferred to let me die inside rather than admit your own failure. It's not a failure to have a son. It is a failure to deny that son, the colonel interrupted with fury. It is a failure to leave a woman and a child helpless, while you marry another and pretend they don't exist. You don't understand, James shouted, and for the first time, Isabel saw tears in his eyes. Not of sadness, of anger, of frustration, of a cornered man. You don't understand anything. I didn't want that child. I didn't want that responsibility. I was young. I had plans. You had to be a man, Junior said from the height of his 16 years, voice dripping with contempt. But you preferred to be a coward. James turned to the boy with fury. But before he could take a step, the colonel was in front of him again. Don't even think about it. You won't lay a hand on my son. Third question, Isabel said, and her voice was colder now, distant, as if she were already moving away from all that. Did you ever love me? Even once, in 10 years, did you feel anything for me besides obligation? James turned to her, and Isabel saw the answer in his eyes before he opened his mouth. She saw the raw, painful, liberating truth. I tried, he said, and for the first time he seemed honest. I swear I tried, but every time I looked at you, all I saw was the prison, the marriage my mother arranged, the life I didn't choose. You were good, hardworking, dedicated, everything a wife should be, but I never loved you. I can't lie about that now. The words should have hurt. They should have broken what was left of Isabel's heart. But instead of pain, she felt relief. Relief to finally hear the truth. Relief to know she hadn't imagined all that coldness. Relief that it wasn't her fault he had never loved her. Thank you, she said. Thank you for the honesty. Finally. So you're coming back? James took a hopeful step forward. Now that I've told the truth, are you coming back? Isabel gave a laugh, short, humorless, but genuine. Go back? Go back to what? To live with a man who never loved me? Who let me be destroyed to protect his own name? Who has a son he doesn't recognize? She shook her head. No, James. I'm not going back. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. You can't leave me. You are my wife. But I was never the wife of your heart. And I won't waste my life anymore, waiting for crumbs from a man who has no love to give. James stood there, swaying slightly, face red, hands trembling. Isabel saw the moment he was going to snap, saw it in his eyes, in the way his muscles tensed. He was going to lunge. He was going to try to take her by force. But before he could move, Colonel Teodoro pulled something from his pocket. A yellowed envelope, folded and worn. He threw it on the ground at James's feet. This here is a letter. Helen wrote it when the boy was born. It has the father's name, the date, everything. It also has a photo, the boy at 4 years old. He is your face, James. There is no denying it. James looked at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. And I have copies, several copies. One with the priest, one with the notary, one kept with my lawyer. The colonel crossed his arms. If you try to force Isabel to return, If you try to do anything against her or against my family, these letters go to everyone. They go to the council, to the newspaper, to every church between here and the capital. Everyone will know what kind of man you are. You wouldn't have the guts. Test me, the colonel said softly. Just test me and see. For a long moment, no one moved. The sun was starting to set, tinting everything gold and red. The cicadas sang in the trees. A dog barked in the distance, normal life continuing while that small world crumbled. James bent down, picked up the envelope. He opened it with trembling fingers. Isabel saw when he looked at the contents, saw his face crumble, saw the recognition, saw the defeat. "This isn't over," he said, but the voice came out weak, without conviction. "This isn't over, Theodore." "Yes, it is," the colonel replied. "It was over the moment you chose lies over truth. Cowardice over courage. Now go. Take your men and get off my property." James mounted the horse, movements clumsy. The other men followed him, some casting confused glances, others clearly uncomfortable with everything they had witnessed. They moved away slowly, the sound of hooves on stones getting more and more distant. When they finally disappeared from view, Isabel felt her legs fail. The colonel caught her before she fell, strong arms around her, and for the first time in a week, in 10 years, in her entire life, Isabel allowed herself to fall apart. She cried on the shoulders of that man she barely knew, but who had done more for her than anyone who claimed to love her. She cried for the life she had lost, for the time wasted, for the woman she had been and would never be again. She cried until she had no more tears, until she was empty, until she could finally breathe again. "It's over," the colonel murmured into her hair. "It's over. You are free now." Free. The word was strange, terrifying, wonderful. That night, after the children went to sleep, after the house fell silent, Isabel and the colonel sat on the porch. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. They just sat there, side by side, looking at the stars, the comfortable silence between them. "Thank you," Isabel said, eventually, "for the letter, for the copies, for everything. You don't need to thank me. It was the right thing." "How did you get it? The letter, the photo?" The colonel sighed. "I went to find Helen 2 days ago. Explained the situation. She gave me the letter she had kept all these years. Said she never wanted anything from James. Never wanted to force him to be a father. Only wanted him to acknowledge the child. But he refused, threatened, made her and her family move in shame. And the boy? Anthony. He's 11. Studious, hard-working, doesn't know who his father is. Helen never told him, said it's better that way. Better to have no father than to have one who doesn't want him." Isabel thought about that child, her non-son, the son James had but denied, while blaming her for not giving children he never truly wanted. "I want to meet him," she said suddenly. "Anthony, I want to meet him." The colonel looked at her with surprise. "Are you sure?" "I am. He is innocent in all this. And maybe I can help in some way. Not as a mother. Helen is his mother and always will be. But as someone who cares. Someone who knows he deserves better than he was given." They sat in silence a little longer. Isabel felt when the colonel's hand moved, touching hers lightly. It wasn't a gesture of possession or lust. It was a gesture of recognition, of two people who had lost much, recognizing in each other the possibility of finding something new. "Isabel," he said her name so softly she almost didn't hear. "I'm not offering you anything. I'm not promising you anything. But I want you to know that you can stay here as long as you need. And when you are ready, when you know what you want to do with your life, I will support you, whatever it is. And if I want to stay, not as a guest, but as part of this? Her heart beat too fast after asking the question. It was too bold. It was too fast. It was everything it shouldn't be. But the colonel didn't pull back. Instead, his fingers interlaced with hers, firm and warm. Then I would say you would be very welcome, but only when you are certain. Only when it's not out of fear or having nowhere to go. It has to be because you want to, because you choose. No one ever let me choose before. I let you. I always will. They stayed like that until late, hands interlaced, comfortable silence, the stars shining above as silent witnesses to something new beginning to be born from the ashes of everything that had been destroyed. And for the first time in her life, Isabel Miller felt that maybe, just maybe, she could have a future that was truly hers. Justice for Isabel. Comment down below what you thought of this twist. And tell me, which part of this story touched you the most so far? The months that followed were of silent reconstruction. Like a burnt house being raised brick by brick, Isabel rediscovered herself in small moments. In the way she woke up without fear. In the laughter that sprang naturally when the boys told stories at dinner. In the peace of sewing without rush, without judgment, just for the pleasure of creating something beautiful with her own hands. The town, as expected, seethed with gossip. Agatha spread poison on every corner she stepped, painting Isabel as an adulteress, the colonel as an opportunist, the whole situation as a moral scandal of the worst kind. Some families turned their faces when Isabel went into town. Some women whispered when she passed. But others, those who had suffered in silence, those who knew similar pain, looked with something different in their eyes. Recognition, even admiration. It was Mrs. Clara, the town midwife, who first had the courage to speak to Isabel in the street. She stopped in front of her at the market, calloused hands holding a sack of flour, eyes tired but kind. Mrs. Miller, I just wanted to say that I think you are very brave. What you did, leaving that situation, speaking the truth even knowing what they would say, not just any woman has that strength. Isabel felt her eyes sting. It was the first time since the confrontation that someone from town, besides the colonel's family, spoke to her with kindness. Thank you, Mrs. Clara. That means a lot. We women suffer in silence too much in this life, the midwife continued, voice low so as not to be heard by the gossips around. We suffer and endure and die a little every day. Seeing someone have the courage to say enough, that gives hope to others. You have no idea how many. And it was true. In the following weeks, women began to appear at the colonel's estate. They came with excuses, bringing eggs, asking for clothes mending, asking about recipes. But what they really wanted was to talk. They wanted to tell their own pains to someone who understood. Drunken, violent, indifferent husbands. Families who blamed them for everything. Dreams buried so deep they didn't even remember they existed anymore. Isabel listened to them. All of them. And in those conversations, in that sharing of pain, something began to bloom. A silent network of women who supported each other, who strengthened each other. Mary participated too, learning young that female strength wasn't weakness, that shared vulnerability was power, not shame. 3 months after the confrontation, on a June afternoon with a gray sky promising rain, Colonel Teodoro returned from town with a woman and a boy. Isabel saw them arriving through the living room window, and her heart raced. She knew who they were even before seeing them up close. Helen was thin, with that thinness of someone who works hard and eats little. She had deep dark eyes, black hair tied in a simple bun, hands rough from washing clothes and working in the fields. Dress mended but clean, posture erect, despite the visible poverty. There was dignity in her, dignity that no humiliation had managed to break. And beside her, holding her hand tightly, was Anthony, 11 years old, tall for his age, green eyes that Isabel recognized immediately. They were James's eyes, the only inheritance the father had given. But everything else about him was different. He had his mother's sweetness in his shy smile, gentleness in his careful gestures, sharp intelligence in the way he observed everything around him. Isabel walked down the porch steps, heart beating fast. She stopped in front of Helen, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Two women who had been destroyed by the same man in different ways. "Helen," Isabel said softly, "thank you for coming." "Mrs. Miller," Helen curtsied, the formal manners of someone who knows their place in the social hierarchy. "The colonel said you wanted to meet me. I brought Anthony too, as asked." "I did, yes, very much." Isabel knelt down to be at the boy's height. "Hi, Anthony." "My name is Isabel. It's a pleasure to meet you." The boy looked at his mother, seeking permission. When Helen nodded, he extended his hand with a politeness someone had worked hard to teach. "Pleasure, Mrs. Miller. My mother said you are a seamstress. Mom sews too. She makes the prettiest dresses in the region." The pride in his voice when speaking of his mother was so pure, so genuine, that Isabel felt her throat tighten. "I'm sure she is. Your mother must be very talented." They went inside the house. Mary had already prepared coffee and corn cake, and the colonel's sons appeared curious but respectful. Anthony was immediately charmed by them, and soon they were in the yard, the city boy fascinated by farm life, the farm boys happy to have someone new to show the horses and cattle to. Isabel, Helen, and the colonel stayed on the porch. A heavy silence hung for a moment, until Isabel broke it. "Helen, I know this must be strange, very strange, but I needed to meet you. I needed to say, I'm sorry." Helen widened her eyes, confused. "Sorry? But you didn't do anything wrong." "I married him. I lived 10 years in his house while you raised his son alone. I should have suspected. I should have investigated." "You didn't know," Helen interrupted, voice firm. "James lied to me, lied to you, probably lied to everyone he ever knew. Liars lie. It's what they do. The guilt is not on who believes the lie, it's on who tells it." They sat in silence, digesting those words. The colonel poured coffee for both, then discreetly withdrew, giving space for them to talk. "How was it?" Isabel asked. "Raising him alone. It couldn't have been easy." Helen gave a sad smile. "It wasn't. In the first years, I thought 1,000 times about giving up. My family disowned me when I got pregnant, said I had brought shame. I had to move, work in strange houses, accept any job that appeared." She looked to where her son was playing in the yard, voice softening. "But when I look at him, when I see the man he is becoming, gentle, honest, hard-working, I know it was worth it. Every tear, every sleepless night, every day without eating right so he could eat. It was worth everything. He is beautiful, Helen, inside and out. You did a wonderful job. I did what any mother would do. I loved my son. Simple as that." Helen took a sip of coffee, then looked directly at Isabel. "Mrs. Miller, can I be honest? Please. When the colonel came to find me, when he told me about you and about what James had done during all these years, I didn't feel pity for you. I felt anger." Helen paused. "Anger because you had a roof, food on the table, society's respect, everything that was denied to me. It seemed unfair that you suffered when you had so much, while I had so little." Isabel said nothing, only listened. "But then the colonel told me everything. The humiliations, the years being blamed, the way Agatha destroyed you in the public square. And I realized, We suffered the same way, just in different prisons. Mine was of poverty and rejection. Yours was of lies and guilt. But both were prisons. They were, Isabel agreed. And I'm trying to get out of mine, just like you got out of yours. Helen extended her hand across the table. Isabel took it, and in that grip, there was more than sympathy. There was recognition. Sisterhood forged in shared pain. Anthony asks about his father sometimes, Helen said. I always say he left before he was born, that he didn't want to stay. But I don't tell him who it is. I don't want him growing up knowing he has a father in the next town who actively rejects him. I prefer him to think the father simply didn't know about him. It is the right choice, the colonel said, returning to the porch. A child doesn't need to carry rejection from parents. Life gives enough to deal with already. They stayed talking all afternoon. Helen told about work, about the dreams she had for Anthony. She wanted him to study, to go beyond what she achieved. Isabel spoke about sewing, about how she had learned with her mother, about the embroidery she did when she wanted to calm her mind. They discovered they had much in common. Both had lost their mothers early. Both knew how to cook the same country dishes. Both had that same silent strength of a woman who learns to survive. When the sun began to set, painting the sky pink and orange, Helen stood up to leave. Anthony was reluctant to go, having already made friends with the colonel's sons, especially Peter, who had promised to teach him to ride a horse. Can I come back? The boy asked, green eyes shining with hope. Please, Mom. They said I can come help with the horses. Helen looked at the colonel, unsure. He nodded. Of course you can. Whenever you want. In fact, if you want to spend a few days here during the holidays, learn about the farm, you are welcome. My boys would love the company. Anthony's face lit up like a lit lamp. Helen had tears in her eyes, of gratitude, of relief, of seeing her son finally being treated with the dignity he always deserved. Before leaving, Helen hugged Isabel. It was a long, tight hug, loaded with everything words couldn't say. Thank you, Helen whispered, for not hating me, for not blaming my son, for being kind when the world was so cruel. Thank you, Isabel replied, for showing me that one can be a mother, even without having given birth. That love doesn't need blood to be real. When Helen and Anthony left, Isabel stayed on the porch, watching them disappear down the road. She felt the colonel approach, standing beside her. You did a beautiful thing today, he said. I just did what was right. That boy has no fault in anything. And Helen, she is strong, stronger than me. You are both strong, just in different ways. He hesitated. Then, Isabel, there is something I need to ask you. Her heart accelerated. What? Have you thought about the future? About what you are going to do? Not that I want you to leave, I don't. But I know you can't stay here forever as a guest. People will keep talking, and eventually... I know, Isabel interrupted. I have thought about it. A lot. She took a deep breath, gathering courage for what she was going to say. Theodore, Can I call you Theodore? Of course, please. Theodore, I need to tell you something. And if you don't feel the same, it's fine. I will understand and find another place to stay. There will be no problem at all. Isabel. He held her face gently, forcing her to look him in the eyes. Speak, without fear. I want to stay. Not as a guest, not as charity. I want to be part of this here for real. Of your family, of your life. I know it's too soon. I know we barely know each other. I know you still love your wife. I will always love my Bernadette, he said honestly. She was the mother of my children. She was my youth's love. But she is gone. And I spent 3 years living like a ghost, just taking care of what I had to take care of, without really living. Until you appeared. He brushed his thumb over her cheek. the touch soft as a feather. You woke me up, Isabel. You made me remember that there is still life to be lived, that one can still feel, fight, protect someone. And over these months, seeing you rebuild yourself, seeing you bloom, seeing you with my children. He stopped, voice choked. I fell in love with you, not in the same way I loved Bernadette. It is different, more mature, calmer. But it is love, real love. The tears streamed freely down Isabel's face now. Then marry me, she said, when possible. I don't mind waiting as long as necessary, but marry me. Let me be your wife for real. Let me be a mother to your children, a companion for your life. Let me stay. Are you sure? Because there is no going back, Isabel. If you stay, if we make this official, the town will talk even more. They will say you were an adulteress from the start, that I seduced a married woman. Let them talk, she said with a strength that surprised them both. Let them talk until their tongues tire. I don't live to please people who never loved me anymore. I live for myself now. And for those who really care. Theodore pulled her into a hug, and there on the porch, under the darkening sky, they stood like that. Two survivors of different storms, finding a harbor in each other. Haven't subscribed to the channel yet? Leave that like, hit the bell icon, and share this story with whoever needs to hear that it's never too late to start over. And click right there on the next story. You won't want to miss it. 6 months later, on a clear December morning, Isabel and Theodore married in the small chapel on the estate. It wasn't a big, pompous wedding. It was intimate, meaningful. Present were the Colonel's 5 children, Helen and Anthony, Mrs. Clara, the midwife, some of the women who had become Isabel's friends, and half a dozen other families who had the courage to defy public opinion. Isabel wore a simple white cotton dress she had sewn herself, wildflowers in her hair, her feet in leather sandals. Theodore was in a dark suit, the same one he wore at his wedding to Bernadette, but it was all right. It wasn't a betrayal of the first wife's memory. It was honor. It was continuing to live as she would have wanted him to live. When they exchanged vows, when the priest declared them husband and wife, Mary cried with happiness. The boys applauded. Anthony, who had become a constant presence at the farm, cheered along with the others. And James? James had left town 2 months earlier, unable to bear the weight of the exposed truth. Agatha remained, bitter and lonely, but her poison had lost its power. People had heard the truth. They had seen the letters, met Anthony, understood the whole lie, and a lie exposed to the sun loses strength. Life on the farm continued, but now with Isabel truly part of it. She cared for Theodore's children as if they were her own, not trying to replace the mother they had lost, but adding her own love to the memory they carried. She cooked, sewed, managed the house, advised, consoled, laughed. Helen came to visit frequently, and she and Isabel developed a deep friendship. Friendship forged in shared pain and mutual healing. Anthony spent holidays on the farm, learning about farming, about horses, about how to be a good man. Theodore never treated him differently from his own sons, and the boy bloomed in that environment of acceptance. 1 year after the wedding, on an autumn afternoon with leaves falling from the trees, Isabel was on the porch sewing when she felt something different. A dizziness, a morning nausea that had appeared weeks ago. She hadn't paid attention at first, thinking it was something she had eaten. But Mrs. Clara, visiting for tea, noticed the signs. Mrs. Miller, the midwife said with a knowing smile, "You are pregnant." The world stopped. The needle fell from Isabel's hand, hitting the wooden floor. Theodore, who was reading the newspaper in the chair next to her, dropped everything and came running. "Pregnant?" he repeated, incredulous. But how? I thought... It was never her, Mrs. Clara said. I always suspected. I've seen cases like this before. The problem wasn't hers. Isabel placed her hand on her belly, still disbelieving. 10 years of being called barren. 10 years carrying guilt. And now, I'm going to be a mother, she whispered, tears starting to fall. I'm going to be a real mother. Theodore hugged her, weeping too, weeping with happiness, relief, gratitude for a second chance at everything. At love, at family, at life. Mary ran down the stairs, having heard the conversation. Really? Are we going to have a baby? Really, Isabel confirmed, opening her arms. The girl threw herself into them, laughing and crying at the same time. Soon, all the boys knew. Soon, the whole house was celebrating. And when Helen arrived with Anthony for the weekly visit and heard the news, she hugged Isabel tightly. You deserve this, Helen said. You deserve all the happiness in the world. The months of pregnancy passed peacefully. Isabel was afraid. Of course, afraid of childbirth, of complications, of losing the baby. But Theodore was always by her side, reminding her to breathe, to trust, to believe. Mrs. Clara came every week to check, and this time, Theodore didn't trust only the midwife. He brought a doctor from the city to monitor as well. He wasn't going to lose another wife, not when he had finally found happiness again. And on a June night, with rain falling gently outside and the house full of expectation, Isabel gave birth to a girl. A small, pink girl with strong lungs who screamed as soon as she arrived in the world. A girl who came to announce that new beginnings are always possible. They named her Bernadette, in honor of the first wife, the first mother. It wasn't replacement, it was honor. It was a way to keep memory alive while building a new future. And when Isabel held that child for the first time, when she looked into the Colonel's eyes and saw tears of pure joy, when she heard the 5 stepchildren whispering in wonder around the crib, when she felt Helen squeeze her hand in solidarity and celebration, Isabel finally understood. It wasn't about having been barren or not. It wasn't about who was to blame. It was about finding where you belong. It was about having the courage to start over when everything seems lost. It was about understanding that love comes from unexpected places, that family is who chooses to stay, that it is never too late to be happy. 10 years she spent in darkness, but that girl in her arms was proof that after the longest night, the sun always rises again. And tell me, what did you think of this story? Comment down below. Did Isabel's journey touch you? Do you know someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to start over? Then share this video. Tag that person. Spread this message of hope. And look, the story doesn't end exactly here. Because 5 years later, when little Bernadette was already running through the orchard after her older brothers, when Anthony was 16 and helping Theodore manage the farm as if he were a blood son, when the house lived full of laughter and life, Isabel and Helen opened a sewing studio together in town. They called it Mending Hearts. And there, among threads and needles, among fabrics and embroidery, they taught other women. They taught not only how to sew, but how to have a profession, independence, dignity. They taught that one could survive alone if necessary. They taught that female strength wasn't weakness. The town that had condemned both now saw daughters sent to learn from them. Saw wives seeking not just clothes mending, but advice, venting, ears that understood. The studio became a refuge. It became a sacred place of silent transformation. And Agatha? She died 3 years after Isabel's wedding, alone and bitter, without ever having asked for forgiveness. James never returned. They say he married again in another town, that he had children he acknowledged this time. Isabel didn't know, didn't care. That chapter had closed for good. On a random December afternoon, 8 years after that fateful Sunday in the square, Isabel was at the studio when a young woman entered. She couldn't have been more than 20, eyes red from crying, clothes crumpled, that look of someone who had reached their limit. "Mrs. Miller?" she asked with a trembling voice. "They told me you help women, that you understand." Isabel put down the embroidery she was doing, stood up, pulled a chair for the girl. "Sit here, child. Tell me what is happening." And while she listened to that story, one more story of a woman being destroyed by lies, by guilt that wasn't hers, by love that was never real love, Isabel held that girl's hand and said, "You are not alone, and you don't need to stay in this situation. There is a way out. There is a new beginning. I know because I lived it." And she told her own story. She told about the 10 years of humiliation, about the Sunday in the square, about the colonel who had the courage to challenge the whole town, about the truth that liberated, about the love that was born from the ashes of everything that was destroyed. She told it to give hope, to show that it is possible, that it is never too late, that the life that seems over can be just the beginning of something bigger, better, truer. And when that girl left the studio, with eyes still wet but lit with new determination, Isabel looked out the window at the cloudless blue sky and smiled. She had been broken. She had been called barren, defective, useless. But she had survived. She had bloomed. And now she used her scars to help others survive too. Because in the end, that's what we do with pain. Either we let it destroy us, or we transform it into a bridge for others who are drowning in the same river that almost killed us. And Isabel had chosen to be a bridge. Did this story touch you? Then don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, share with whoever you think needs to hear this. And tell me in the comments, what was the part that moved you the most? Was it the colonel's courage? Isabel's strength? The forgiveness between Isabel and Helen? Life is made of new beginnings, and it is never, ever too late to be happy.